I think all relationship education is about ways to work with our triggers and our upset, the anxiety, the fear that happens when our attachment needs are not being met. And that's the ongoing experience. That's the skill that we need to learn. And regardless if you're in a relationship for 6 months or 6 years, or even much, much longer, these attachment triggers generally don't go away because that's the nature of relationship. There's misunderstandings, miscommunications, we step on each other's toes, we have certain needs and expectations and assumptions and we don't voice them, or the other person says something that's unskilled and it pushes our buttons, and then they get their buttons pushed because our buttons are pushed. And it's very much like this snowball experience of misunderstanding. And for you, if you happen to have any history of attachment trauma, where your attachment needs were just outright ignored over time, developmentally, it doesn't mean that you can put your finger on one specific experience, but over time, you might have had good connection with probably parents, caregiver, family member, but you're also simultaneously ignored. That there was, we could go as far as say emotional neglect, but some people don't like that word because it's putting a label on something that feels so finite. And if we balance out and say, well, I've had other good experiences with caregivers, parents, family, and it wasn't all bad, but yet we find in our relationships that we're very easily activated and a flood of emotion can show up where we either really implode and shut down. That experience when you're at dinner, everything's fine, you're having your appetizer, you're talking, and then all of a sudden you just kind of shut down because you got a look, or you didn't get a look, or you shared something and it just fell flat and there wasn't any response coming back, or something was said that activated fear, that made you question trusting the relationship itself or trusting the other person. And then it feels like dinner's ruined, and it feels like, and you're internally talking to yourself, come on, snap out of it, return to dinner, like say something, like don't let this ruin the evening. And it's almost like the lights start slowly dimming and you get this myopic sense of like this being shut in, and then the other person says, what's wrong? And maybe the other person does or doesn't have the skill to manage that, but then they feel fearful that you're fearful, and or they might feel defensive that they now have to explain themselves, or that perhaps you're unskilled in presenting it as if they are inadequate and they've done something really to hurt you. And so then they immediately feel like, well, they're being attacked. And this cycle just keeps happening and happening. I think that this is the most important thing we need to learn in relationships. Like, we don't need to watch all these other videos about all these other things. Now, I like the other videos, and I make other videos about like the origin of like, how does this happen? Where's this coming from? But it all goes back to fear of vulnerability and fear of intimacy, and that we've learned strategies to protect ourselves. For those of us who have some history of attachment trauma, and there was this disconnect and a severing of the attachment bond in some way. That could have been immediate. It could have been through abuse, which is often framed as something was done to you. But also the word neglect is this idea of like what was missing and what didn't happen, where relationship with your parent or caregiver or family member really was limited or lacking. This is something got in the way. And what this means is psychologically, psychically, in our attachment awareness, our history, that we know what it is like to have non-attachment and I don't mean in the Buddhist sense of, practicing, looking at your relationship to desire. I'm talking about how there's this absence, there's this void, it's complete loneliness, this emptiness, this, oh my gosh, I am really here by myself, a very tragic, not so enjoyable example to bring up is a child in a crib crying, and a child who there's no relief in sight. And over the years, I've worked with a number of clients who have not only the memory of this happening, but also viscerally in their body to give up crying, to give up calling, to know that no one's coming. It also reminds me in later years how sometimes children, I hear this as adults, they say, well, as a child, I would hide as if I'm playing hide and seek, but we're not playing hide and seek. I would just hide because I was curious to see how long it would take for a family member to realize that I'm missing, and how long would it take for them to start looking for me. You would be surprised or not surprised that a number of people share that story because they share it in the context of no one came. So I say this sensitively, I say this with empathy, I say this gently. We're slowly moving into, let's just imagine, and we don't want to trigger ourselves. This is not about being overly frightened, but we're kind of like inviting that feeling of you're calling for help and there's no help. Or in this case, the help is not so much the urgency of a danger or something that's happening that is, abusive or violent, but you're just reaching out. You're calling for emotional connection. You're calling for, see me, hear me, talk to me, engage with me. Look at this. Let me, what about this? What about this? And this ability to say, are you there? Are you there? Now, this also happens visually. This is why we all often talk about like this idea of being seen. There's something really, really comforting. And I imagine it's very different for anyone who's watching right now who happens to have lost their eyesight, or if they're blind, relying on different cues, verbal cues, behavioral cues to make a call using voice, using hearing, this idea of like call and response. Are you there for me? Yeah, I'm here for you. Are you there for me? Yeah, I'm here for you. And it goes back and forth. And there's this rhythm, and it's so comforting and do you notice how this rhythm is even like rocking a baby? It's like we do this all the time. This is what it means to be in a relationship. And when you're sitting at dinner and you implode and there's some emotional disconnect of revealing yourself, it's not met, it's not received, there's no reciprocity, there's no responsiveness back, an emotional responsiveness. Not just a response, but an emotional response, which sometimes is verbal and literal and other times it's behavioral. But if that back and forth gets interrupted, that frequency of, are you here for me? Yeah, I'm here for you. Are you here for me? Yes, I'm here for you. What about this idea? And what about this idea? And what about this idea? That sounds great. I love that idea. And I'm going to share some joy. Oh, I receive your joy. What a wonderful thing to share. Thank you so much. Oh, by the way, I'm noticing some sadness. Yes, I notice it too. I have my own sadness. And there's this back and forth. And when that's interrupted, what happens is our nervous system lights up like a Christmas tree. It's an alarm system that says, wait a minute, there's something that's been broken in this rhythm of connection. And if we have a history, a knowledge, a knowing, it's in our bones of that attachment bond with or a capacity for bonding had been interrupted by a significant disconnect, our mind, our body, our attachment system remembers that disconnect as being highly, highly problematic to our existence. And it created, on a scale of 0 to 10, a level 10 urgency of, this is bad. This is really bad. If you call for help as an infant, and your call's not received. If you're a toddler in a crib and you're asking for company, connection, laughter, warmth, a hug, hand-holding, some interaction, and that interaction does not come back, this is coded in our body as a great emergency. And let's call that, if we have these attachment glasses, or we have, let's say there's some kind of app that can, we can program our history, and it will show us a readout. It's kind of like a graph and a chart. And this is actually, you could do this as a homework assignment. You could, create this. Put this on a timeline of like, well, when were the significant interruptions and the disconnects? I've also learned this. What we're talking about is kind of Swiss cheese. When we're the image of Swiss cheese, that if you take a cross section of Swiss cheese, there's some solid parts, and then there's a bunch of holes. Now we're not using the holes in the sense of saying like, oh, well, you're broken, or something's missing. It's a realization that not all of us would have received absolute, perfect, consistent, everyday, reliable connection. That's why the phrase from Winnicott, the British psychoanalyst, talks about the good enough mother. We want good enough parenting, good enough relationship, good enough attachment, good enough disappointment, good enough growth. And over time, as long as we're falling within this range, which means everyone's Swiss cheese has some holes in it, but there's going to be, for those of us with some attachment wound, the reason why I like this imagery is the hole is the absence. And if you had some history, for many of us, it's developmental. We can't put our finger on like, oh, yes, I was ignored on May 14th, 1985. Instead, I look back and go, yeah, over the course of a significant 8 or 10 years, I'm really aware of some changes that happened in the family, and I'm really aware of a family culture that did not ask me about myself, and a family culture with other family members who were self-absorbed in their own experiences of anxiety or mental health or addiction. And when I look at my cross-section of the Swiss cheese of development, and I see this hole where there was a disconnect, a severing, an obstacle in the attachment bond, that absence in that hole of the Swiss cheese is a really lovely image and metaphor, because many of us internalize, meaning we live in our inner world experience with that particular absence. And we start to develop a relationship with what is not there. And let's call it the void. And sometimes I even like to emphasize it and call it the great void. This creates a relationship with emptiness. And for many of us, we have a lifetime from childhood to current adult to current relationships through the decades where, yeah, I have lived with a haunting emptiness, an absence, a void. And at times, I am aware of a deep wisdom of what it's like to be someone who can see life through the lens of this profound emptiness. It sometimes, not for all of us, but sometimes links to a particular depth of compassion. It's through my ability to sit in my sadness and to make sense of how sad it is to be in the experience of this emptiness, this void of relationship. It's non-relating. We have a tolerance for relationship not working out. We have a tolerance for our needs not being met. We have a tolerance for being in relationship, and this might sound confusing, through the absence. It's like the absence, the emptiness, the void, the loneliness is the baseline, and I'm relating and it becomes a skill, like it becomes a tool. It becomes a mechanism for how we, those of us with attachment trauma, actually create relationship. It's kind of like always there. And some of us so misidentify it or over-identify with it to the point that we think that it's the core of who we are. And we have become the wound. We're relating in relationship by leading with the wound. And we think like, well, yeah, I'm going to bring my wound with me. That's how I want to be in relationship. And I know what it's like to be ignored. So in fact, it's going to be really, really important for me that you don't ignore me. And I want you to know this part about myself. But unfortunately, there's great limitations when we're also trying to keep the wound present when we're building connection with a person in real time, in real life, as an adult, because this has happened for most of us in childhood, which is what's referred to as this age regression, or what might be called the phrase adult child. Means you revert back to operating from the strategy and the resources that you had at a particular age, and you revert back to that lower level skill, and you're not even operating from an adult who's trying to be in relationship. So it's very, very painful. And when we're in relationship, this emptiness gets activated on a somewhat regular basis. And we need tolerance and grace and gentleness and compassion, lots and lots of compassion, to know that for many of us, this is what we mean when we say we are practicing our healing work, is that this particular very painful experience of the void and the absence of relating that links us back to a history of being hurt in the past where other people were not reliable and could not sustain. And it's like we get sucked into that hole in the Swiss cheese, and we can't get out for 40 minutes or for 4 hours. Sometimes, I hate to say it, but we all know it's true. Sometimes it's for 4 days or longer. And we're trying to be in relationship, but we simultaneously have this history of when it has to do with vulnerability and intimacy and voicing our needs and receiving. I mean, we're frightened of receiving the level of connection and care that we say that we want, and trusting that attachment bond, because we still have this memory and this knowing and this imprint and this blueprint in our psyche and our body, our nervous system, and anything that threatens this activates the alarm system. So that's why I opened this video by saying, I think this is the most important skill that we need to learn. And this is really what we're talking about, is that if you are in relationship, if you want to be in relationship, you need to be prepared for this particular absence, emptiness, loneliness, to activate when your needs are not being met. Usually what happens is that we default, kind of mindlessly, to protective defensive behaviors to manage I'm going to sound dramatic here, the death fear. Like there's a fear, like you're going to die in this place of complete absence and non-relationship, and where your attachment needs are not being met. And that is so frightening and scary. And some of us have created some distance and buffer from the intensity of that fear by developing some personality traits and behaviors, and developing an attachment style as an adaptive response to trying to compartmentalize and move away from the intensity of that kind of attachment fear. So what does that look like? Some of us are very defensive. We're very angry. We're quick to be reactionary. We slam cupboard doors, and we openly think of a child in a crib crying who starts having a temper tantrum. Well, many of us do that as adults. We can't handle in our nervous system the intensity of being denied connection. And this might show up when you're at a really lovely, nice evening dinner at a restaurant where something is said, and either, here's the tricky part, and I'm so sorry to say it like this, because we judge ourselves harshly, we blame ourselves, and that kind of shame is folded all into this. We think it's our fault that we're not getting our attachment needs met. And if something happens like over dinner and we just find ourselves going into this very demanding temper tantrum, or anger shows up, the defensive, it's going to impact the other person. And then now we're not only managing the immediacy of what happened, but now our own history has showed up, but we're simultaneously alienating the person that we're with, and they're experiencing now being impacted by our outburst, or our anger, or our defensiveness, or our poutiness. And in this moment, let's just pause and let in the compassion for the kindness that we need to ourselves. I love the word grace when it comes to relationship. To be able to say, it's happening again. I'm feeling really triggered. I wish it wasn't happening. Let's talk through this. Let's practice a protocol of repair, which is part of the point of this video, is that if we know this is going to happen, if we know that this level of degree of intensity of feeling when attachment needs are not met, then we need some skills to work through with the other person. How can we get back on track? One of the saddest things, there's a lot of sadness in what we're talking about, of the origin of where it comes from, but one of the saddest things is that many of us learn, and think of that child in the crib who wants connection, and no one's coming to, acknowledge the kids crying in the crib, is that we have adopted this belief that we're really on our own. And hear this, because the word relationship means relationship. It means relating. It means collaborating. It means participating together. But in the most intense times, when we're activated and our nervous system is on fire and we're feeling this great fear around our attachment needs not being met, many of us continue on in the same history of the origin of the wound, which is just handle it on your own. Handle it on your own. You've got to take care of this. Now, there's something to be said about self-soothing. There's something to be said about you need to practice regulating your nervous system. We cannot, be overly dependent on another person taking care of us. But the point that I'm making in this moment is that is the purpose of relationship, is that we have a shared experience, including when it's messy, including when we're triggered, including when our needs are not being met, and that we want to develop skills with each other to be able to openly voice that. And what happens, many of us, like the phrase white knuckling, like we're at, again, the example of like this dinner, we're at this dinner and we're like white knuckling internally, like coaching ourselves, like pull it together. Don't show that you're upset. Don't, come on. I'm noticing that I'm feeling so, and you can't even speak. It's just, you get really, really silent. So let's say like, it's not like you're defensive or angry. And I'm sure you know this experience. You just shut down. We might call it the freeze response. And then you shut down and you're sitting there, and your partner, your spouse, probably recognizes this. This isn't the first time it happens. But maybe they are supportive and curious. They say, what's going on? What's happening? And you just have this belief that you're supposed to keep it to yourself. And sometimes we get so shut down. It's the feeling like, if I have to ask, I'm not going to say anything. It's oftentimes what I refer to as, if I have to explain to you how to throw me a surprise birthday party, and if I have to orchestrate the organizing that surprise birthday party, and I have to explain who to invite and how to invite, and if I need to sell you on this is important to me, then I'm just not even going to mention a birthday party, because that level of needing to convince another person that your wants and desires, in this context, beyond the metaphor of the birthday party, that your emotional needs are valued. And oftentimes what we feel like when we're really shut down in this particular place, because we're so invisible and hurt, is that we do want the other person to like, could you please offer some emotional connection here? And I'm going to say something so not just not joyful to hear, is that in general, we will be in a relationship with someone who has their own attachment trauma wounds. Now, the good news of that is, oh, good, we're all on the same page. There's no confusion. The challenge is like in that moment when we want relationship repair, we're asking a person who has some limitations on themselves. If you look at their Swiss cheese, they also have like this, there's this hole of where they too, their attachment needs weren't being met. And historically, for most of us, what it means is that we tried multiple ways to get our attachment needs met, and we were thwarted or punished for having needs, or just told like, that's not a need. That we received some very negative feedback, be it a look, be it a behavior, be it just outright, dismissing us and what we're sharing. And that we have the word, if we talk about insecure attachment, like the insecurity is around, we feel insecure asking for our needs to be met. So there's already this great fear to voice that you have needs. But then in those moments, if you're with someone who doesn't quite know that this is happening, and you have to explain it, and then it feels like you're trying to like convince them to throw a birthday party for you, and you're trying to explain like why people like surprise birthday parties. It can feel so discouraging, so outrageously discouraging, and we implode back into that freeze experience. And then I bet you know what it's like. Many of us have done this. Then you're in the car, and there's this really uncomfortable tension in the car, and no one's speaking. Now, for some of us, that also mirrors childhood. You see, there's the cycle. And many times, if you really step back and you break down, well, what are the flavors? What are the components? What are the variables that go into the cycle? Chances are you might be able to see the pattern. And that being in that space of uncomfortable tension where no one's speaking in the car, that oftentimes is a variable, is a part of the actual bigger picture cycle. And that represents that history. And it doesn't literally mean that we were a toddler in a crib, but since I started using that metaphor, I'm going to use it. That's the experience of the toddler in the crib. Just sitting, waiting, no one's talking, nothing to be said. The toddler's pre-verbal, doesn't literally have language. And if we age regress in that moment, and what's getting activated is a infrastructure, an attachment infrastructure that takes us back to being a toddler ignored in a crib, we don't know what to, not only can we not ask for a birthday party, we do not have the words, the capability, the sophistication to even present what is happening. And so then we just, in the car, stay in this. It becomes like a trance. You kind of like enter this trance feeling of great disconnect. Like the other person, like you feel like you're on different planets. Or back to the language idea. You feel like all of a sudden you don't even have words. You speak different languages. And it's very easy in that moment to the guardedness and the defensiveness, the shoring. We're already so hurt that then we're shoring up our defensiveness, and it's going to take so many minutes, so many hours to then also dismantle and work through that defensiveness. What I'm sharing in this video, I feel pretty confident you know what I'm talking about. But what I'm framing is not just the understanding that this happens, but to say, I have a feeling this is going to happen for the rest of your life. I'm the bearer of good news. And I will say for me, I know it will happen to me for the rest of my life. So if we know this, if I know this about myself, then I can step out of myself when I'm not triggered. I have some clarity of mind. I'm more grounded in cognitive, higher executive functioning. I have language. I have some education around attachment trauma. I feel pretty confident. I know what's happening. I know where it came from, and I know what's happening. So I need language to be able to talk about it, which is why I make videos, because it reinforces my own ability to talk about this. But we need to develop relational repair skills with a partner, and we need to learn about self-soothing and co-regulation. So like, how do we regulate our own body? How do we also utilize interaction with others who can receive us? We need to become a bit more sophisticated in our ability to ask for our needs to be met and to know the incredible risk in the vulnerability. And chances are, as I've already said, you probably have picked someone who has their own fears around being vulnerable and intimate and revealing themselves. So their triggers might look totally different. Their behaviors, their responses might be different. I mean, that's what we mean by attachment styles. Very generically, we can put attachment styles into two categories, which are people who try much harder and they pursue connection. That's that clinging, needy, like, I need more reassurance. Please, please help tell me, show me that it's safe to be with you because I cannot handle the intensity. And then other people, the opposite attachment style is the distancing, I'm going to get out of here. I didn't want nothing to do with this. This is too intense, too much. My nervous system is already fried. And to ask anything more of me is just feels like I'm going to lose my mind. Both experiences feel like you're losing your mind. One tries much harder for reaching. The other one tries much harder for distancing and pulling away. And can you imagine, and I'm sure you've experienced this before, if you've had a few relationships, that when you meet someone who is the opposite of the distancer or the pursuer, depending on what you are, that's oftentimes a recipe for you just trigger each other. And it's this, it completes, it crescendos. And it comes back to the point of this video, is saying, this is going to happen again. We know this. So instead of trying to handle it by ourselves, white knuckling it, downplaying it, ignoring it, we need the skills, and it has to do with someone who's safe. And in this context, I really want it to be a partner, someone you're dating. I mean, that's the best practice, but maybe that's too risky right now. So it could be a friend, could be a family member. But we have to learn how to narrate this cycle and strengthen, and when I say very, very hard, strengthen the objective, the observer self who can take an objective view to hopefully start to narrate, it's happening. It's happening again. I am decompensating at dinner. I feel like I'm 5 years old. I feel unseen. I feel ignored. As if this isn't already challenging enough, I want to make the distinction that in that moment, it doesn't mean that you're not being ignored. The person you're with could still be failing to offer relationship and bids for connection and emotional exchange. That there's you know how, like with a bicycle, you do need a certain momentum to keep the bicycle up and to keep it going? And that is true of emotional interaction, emotional reciprocity, emotional responding, emotional curiosity, emotional mirroring. Do you hear the theme here? Emotional attunement, limbic resonance. It's this, back to that rhythm. We need a certain amount of engagement that's lively, that has a bit of life, that has a spark of being seen, known, heard, valued, understood, and that the other person is engaging and you engage back, and then they respond to your engagement, you respond, and it keeps the bicycle going. And sometimes some relationships, we're with a partner who doesn't respond and we ourselves have given up. Imagine if we had these imaginary bicycles and we had these attachment glasses, and we could look at it. We can go to a restaurant and we can see all the people who they brought their bicycles, but they're just like laying on the floor, and like there's no one's riding a bicycle. Not no one, but the point I'm making for those of us who we enter very painful, very, very painful, a shut down relationship where our relational needs, we give up on our relational, the same way that the child in the crib gives up on the parent. We've repeated that pattern too, and we've given up on our partner, we've given up on the marriage, we've given up on this relationship, we've given up on ourselves, on our having our emotional needs met. And then this creates that feeling of, like, for some of us, for years and years, we're in dead relationships. And then we get stuck looping, stay, go, stay, should I stay, should I leave, should I stay? Oh. And that's what we could also define as the trauma bond, the reenactment. The trauma reenactment is these situations of dead end relating. And there's not enough spark, life, momentum, engagement to get the relationship bicycle going. And again, in support of you and support of your partner, support of all of us, is that it's probably not just your partner. It's we co-create these situations. We subconsciously negotiate that there's also simultaneously the part of ourself that says, I'm not going to reveal myself. Like, are you kidding? I'm not ridiculous. After years and years of being let down, after years and years of missed bids for connection, after years and years of feeling like I've been ignored and my toes get stepped on, and I'm disregarded again, and I'm disregarded again, and I'm not emotionally seen or emotionally engaged. Well, I give up on myself. I give up on my needs. And so then we're in this dead-end relationship, wondering how do we break this cycle? Lastly, to really capture, I've tried to set the stage of what's happening. And the reason why it does have a bit of a repetitious quality in my delivery here is that I am reinforcing that this is going to happen again. And probably, most likely, if you are in a relationship that is not very good for you and it needs to end, it needed to end years ago, and even if it ends, you're probably going to repeat similar patterns to this, or even if you change the pattern, you're still going to be confronted with situations where you feel yourself getting triggered, and the old fears around your attachment needs not being met, and the exposure of vulnerability of just being left there will show up again. And you're right back where we're talking in this video of saying we need the skills and the language to talk through this process, the same way that I talk through it, but to talk through it with a partner. And the best experience is to talk through it when you're not triggered, when it's not happening. You're not at the restaurant. You're not silent. You're not in the car where you can't speak. But in times outside of being triggered, to say, honey, friend, person I'm in relationship with, we know this is going to happen to either of us in different ways. So let's educate ourselves. And just like if you're taking up any kind of sport, you need to practice. Let's practice talking through what happens when we're triggered. What happens when my body registers a level 10 panic around attachment needs going unmet? What happens when we're interacting and I lose my voice? What happens when we're interacting and I regress to age 5? How can you lovingly, if you're not triggered in that moment, participate in this experience and process to show up and to be helpful? Now, here's the rub that the skill we want the other partner to have to engage this emotional regulation, attachment repair is probably a bit lacking, which is the one reason why we continually keep getting triggered and activated. So we're not only framing this on what we need from them, we really need to have conversation to say, honey, tell me what you need from me when you're in this situation yourself. And how does your attachment activated nervous system look different than mine? What is your response, your reactionary response? How do you manage that level of intensity when your attachment needs are not being met? Please share in the comments a phrase, an idea, something from this video that speaks to you. Please know that there's been a change in YouTube algorithm, and videos like this do not get circulated like they once did. And my 140,000 subscribers don't necessarily receive a notification that I just spent a Sunday afternoon, 3 hours preparing for this video so that many people can enjoy it. What helps many people enjoy it is if you leave a comment. And even if better, you share the link, you share through the YouTube interface and post it somewhere else so that someone can find it. That will support me. Thank you so much in advance for doing that. I realize also what an odd way to create a video where I didn't introduce myself. I am Alan Robarge, an attachment-focused psychotherapist, and I work with couples and individuals. And I focus and specialize in what happens when our nervous system is activated in relationship, and how do we come back to a state of equilibrium, and how do we regulate our nervous system so that we can get the relationship that we want, so we can get the love that we want, and also ultimately so we can show up for others as well. And we can verbally name to others how we want them to show up, because we want to practice emotional openness, responsiveness, curiosity, etc., etc. Thank you so much for listening. More videos coming soon, and I will see you next time.